Hey team, I hope you're well. If you don't know who I am, my name is Thomas Blakemore. I teach, shop and sometimes triumph, and this is going to be a teach video. Now, around this time every single year, I receive a range of different messages from individuals who are about to start their newly qualified teaching year, or NQT year as it's commonly referred to. So what I wanted to do in this video is sort of pull together all of my different advice and tips to create a top 20 tips video for NQTs. So before this video starts, I'm running a bit of a survey on this video. Now, if you are an NQT, please hit the like button. If you're a teacher, subscribe to the channel, and if you're none of those, then just hit the like button anyway. So let's jump straight into the video. So tip number one is to join a community. Now, what I mean by that is to join an internet community. There are a range of different social media groups and things like that available for teachers nowadays. And one of the perks of joining those different communities are that you can share ideas, gain ideas, but also ask questions. And we'll get onto that in a second. So you've got groups like Facebook groups, you've got Edu Twitter, you've got TeacherGram, and you've also got channels like this one to support NQTs. So make sure that you join those different communities to be able to gain different ideas. So coming on from that, tip number two is don't be afraid to ask questions. It is likely that sometimes your school may assume you know things that you haven't been told or that you just don't know. So for myself personally, things like assembly times were something that I had to ask the questions about myself because I wasn't sure when assembly times were, and to start off with, I made the mistake of taking my class down to an assembly when it wasn't my assembly time. So just make sure that you ask those questions so that it avoids that anxiety and stress of not knowing. Tip number three is to read, and to continue CPD. Just because you finished your teacher training doesn't mean that the learning stops. So continue with your CPD, whether that's reading a range of different materials to support your pedagogy through your NQT year, or doing other things that support your CPD knowledge or continued professional development knowledge. And that might be watching videos like this or attending live Zoom sessions and things like that. So just make sure you're continuing your own knowledge after you've finished that training. Tip number four, allow yourself to be an NQT and make mistakes. Now, yes, you have finished your teacher training, but you are a newly qualified teacher. You are in your first year of teaching. There are going to be things that you try that you make mistakes with. At the same time, don't be afraid to then take those risks that allow you to make those mistakes. By doing that, you're going to develop yourself further. By making mistakes and taking risks, you're going to gain a better understanding of the things that work with your class, the things that work through your teaching style, and will help you develop yourself into a better teacher overall. Use your NQT time wisely. Now, this is one I've spoken about before as a bit of a mistake that I made. Make sure you use your NQT time wisely. Don't be like me and sit in the staff room typing out lesson plans, but also procrastinating lots. Now, use that time wisely to do things that you need to get done. This is one opportunity that you have to have that extra time to get those things done. So just make sure you use that time wisely. Speak to your mentor if you're struggling to use that time wisely so that you can allocate specific activities and things that you need to do within that time. Next tip, use your NQT time to go and see other teachers teach. This is a tip that is often overlooked, and I believe it's one of the most important. Teaching, at the end of the day, is a bit of a magpie profession. You will gain ideas from going to see other teachers teach. You will gain a better understanding of the teacher that you want to be or don't want to be by going to see other teachers teach. Now, it doesn't have to be just teachers within your school. You can also request to go and see other teachers in different schools if you've heard of those teachers doing fantastic things, or your heads have seen other things in different schools that they think, yeah, you should go and see that. Make those requests because you have that NQT time that you can use to go and see teachers teach. Yes, you do it lots in university, but it's still really important to continue doing so in your NQT year and after your NQT year too. And it's something that I often overlook too. Overlook, that one. Make mistakes. I'm making mistakes. Next tip, don't take yourself too seriously. Whilst it is important to remain professional, it's also really critical to make sure you have fun. Yes, as I said before, you're going to make mistakes. So don't be afraid to laugh about those mistakes with your colleagues and also with the children, because they will absorb that fun, and if the learning is more fun, then they are more likely to absorb that knowledge too. So just make sure you're having fun with it. That links onto the next tip. Smile. Whoever made the myth of don't smile till Christmas, I'm not sure they're actually a teacher, because if you don't smile till Christmas, it's very difficult to develop relationships. Which links me on to the next tip. Make sure you get to know everyone who works at your school. Now, by everyone, I mean those individuals who you might sometimes overlook due to how busy your teacher life is. And those are the individuals who are responsible for running the school. People like the caretaker, the receptionists, those canteen staff or lunchtime duty people. So make sure that you actually take the time to get to know those people, develop relationships with those individuals, because you never know when those individuals are going to be able to support you too. It might be that you've forgotten something in school and you need to pick it up during the weekend, but if you have that relationship with the caretaker, you might be able to phone the caretaker. You get what I mean. So make sure you develop those relationships. It's also just part of being a decent teacher, a decent human being too. Whilst we're on the topic of developing relationships, the next tip is to develop relationships with not just the children, but also the parents too. Now, this is really critical. You can do a few things to support developing those relationships. Tip number one within that is to make sure you focus on developing relationships with the children during the first week, rather than focusing too much on the academics. Make sure you actually get to know the children by asking bits about them, rather than focusing on their grades. They're little human beings at the end of the day too. Get to know the parents too. This is really important. You should not be getting to know the parents during parents' evening. You should get to know the parents throughout teaching the children. That might come through phoning parents to let them know that their child's had a fantastic day and making sure that they're okay too. It might be that you need to just send a letter home during the first week and ask them to send a little bit of information about their child. Again, further developing that relationship element. Oh, I didn't know you did ice skating. I really enjoy ice skating too. And you can see that you're starting to develop those relationships. And that also benefits being able to talk about difficult scenarios with parents too, because you have that relationship to be able to talk about those things as well. The next tip is just as crucial too. Whilst it is important to develop relationships with parents, children and staff, it's also just as important to make sure that you create those boundaries with children, parents and staff. Now, if you think about boundaries with parents and staff, you need to make sure that you create those email boundaries as an example. So make sure that you're not having your emails open at 10 o'clock. If you don't create your own boundaries with parents and staff will create the boundaries for you. What I mean by that is if you're replying to emails at 10 o'clock to members of staff in your school, staff will think it's okay for them to do the same and to email you at 10 o'clock. So they're creating those boundaries for you. So just make sure you have that bit of balance and create those boundaries. Whilst we are on the topic of well-being, make sure that you try and develop a work-life balance during your NQT year. Now, that is easier said than done, especially during your NQT year. However, one thing I like to suggest is to continue your hobbies and social life. By continuing your hobbies and social life, such as YouTube, you're more likely to get the things done at school and not want to take those things home, so that you're actually able to enjoy those hobbies and your social life too. My next tip is don't reinvent the wheel. Whilst it is very tempting, especially during your NQT year, to create everything from scratch, there are so many resources available out there now, especially with the internet and online resources that you can use to support your children's learning. Now, I'm not saying that everything should be taken from the internet and websites like Twinkle. However, I am saying that those things are available to support learning rather than creating everything from scratch. The next tip that links onto that is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Now, what I mean by that is if you're working with someone, let's say in a 2-form entry, 2-class per year group school, and your partner teacher has lots of experience in that year group and they're saying, this worked really, really well last year, this activity that we created worked really well, similar to don't reinvent the wheel, go with it, see how it goes. And you can always change it in other ways during the lesson or slightly later on, but what I'm trying to say is if something's worked well before, then don't change it, because you're just creating more work for yourself. My next tip is to make your future self thankful. Now, what I mean by that is make sure you try and stay on top of your organisation. Now, for me, this is a challenge because every year I've been, well, other than this year coming up, I've been in a different year group. So the temptation to keep organised and keep resources together hasn't been so high on my list of priorities. What I found is that by not being organised I'm not thankful towards my future self, because then I'm going, I did this lesson during my year 5 year and this would be really beneficial if I had kept it. So just make sure that you're trying to stay on top of your resources, whether that's you've created a resource and you need to make sure that the files on your computer are organized efficiently, whether you've got paper that you need to make sure is actually in a folder rather than on your desk so that it's organized well for next year. Just try and make your future self thankful by doing organizational things like filling in a diary to support you in the future. Next tip is don't be afraid to say no. During your NQT year as a new member of staff, you will be asked to do a range of different things. Some of those things, such as extracurricular activities, might be things that tip your work-life balance because you've got so many different things going on. You're trying to spin lots of different plates. Someone gives you another plate to spin and the rest topple because you're trying to juggle too many things. Now, there's a range of different ways that you can say no. There's no, nah, nope. No thank you is always a good one, but also asking the individual to reprioritize your schedule. So you might say something along the lines of, yeah, I've got lots of things going on at the moment, so I can't. Or you might say something along the lines of, I'd love to, but what would you like me to reprioritize, or something along those lines. At the same time, you can just say no to those things. My next tip is probably one of the most important tips for teaching. Teaching is a job that is never fully complete. Now, you will learn that there are certain things on your to-do list that sort of stay on your to-do list, that there is always a display that needs doing, a resource that needs that little bit of tweaking. Teaching is what I like to call an infinity pool. Now, there's lots of infinity pools in life. You have social media, YouTube, you've got lots of things like that around you. Teaching is an infinity pool because there is always a little bit extra that you could do. You could always tweak a display. You could always do a little bit more on a lesson plan. You could always type a little bit more. You could always create something different. You get my idea. Teaching is an infinity pool and it's not the best place for perfectionism. If you try and strive for perfectionism during teaching, it will be a challenge because you'll always be tweaking those little extra finer details and you'll find your work-life balance goes out the window. So just get used to the job not ever fully being complete. However, I'm not saying don't do the work. It's still important to do the things that are essential for the next day and those other bits and pieces too. My next tip is reflect. Make sure that you take some time after the day to reflect. Reflect on the things that didn't quite go well that you can improve on, but also at the same time, make sure you take the time to reflect on the things that actually went well. The fact that the child who has had previous behaviour disruptions didn't throughout the day, the fact that you completed a specific amount of planning within the time set, that was always something that I had to reflect on and sort of give myself a bit of credit for. And yeah, just reflect on things that also go well rather than just the things that don't go well. At the same time, it's really important when you're reflecting to not be over analytical and to overthink things too much, because there's a difference between being reflective and too self-critical, and that will just get you down. So whilst it is important to reflect, don't criticize yourself too much. My next tip is that the best resource for the children is you. So look after yourself. Please make sure you do this. I've mentioned this one in a previous video, but make sure you take the time to look after yourself. There's many different ways that you can do that. By having a life outside of school, you can look after yourself, but also in school, if you're struggling with something, make sure you take the time to talk to someone about it, whether that's a mentor or just a friend that you have in school. Make sure you take the time to look after yourself at the same time. If you're feeling ill, then have that day off. Make sure that you're drinking water, eat correctly. There's lots of different well-being tips that you can see in another video that I've made before, but make sure you take the time to look after yourself, because as I said, you are the most important resource to the children. There's no point in burning yourself out because the children will see that. This is my final tip, and it's a really important one to note. On those days that you are feeling like you're overwhelmed, like you're not good enough, they chose you for a reason. Make sure you keep that in your mind. Yes, you are a newly qualified teacher. Yes, you don't have as much experience as other individuals in your school, but your school has chosen to employ you for a reason. They see something within you that is fantastic. So don't go in being someone different. Be yourself, be authentic, and be the amazing educator that I know you are. And that marks the end of the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it and you found a tip or something within this video useful. If you have any other tips, please feel free to comment them down below. It's always really useful to develop a collaborative community where other teachers can communicate effectively. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like it, that's always really appreciated. And as I said at the start, feel free to subscribe to see future content too. Hopefully I will see you in the next one, but until then, I'm out.